The moment Cora Brenner stepped off the stagecoach in Dusty Creek, Texas, in the spring of 1878, the wind ripped the hat clean off her head and sent it tumbling across the dirt road like a tumbleweed with a personal vendetta. And she thought to herself that this raw, unforgiving land might just be the perfect place to start over. She stood there on the unpaved Main Street, blinking against the gust, watching her green felt hat roll toward a pair of worn leather boots that belonged to a man leaning against the post of the general store. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same red stone as the canyon walls rising behind the town. He reached down with one easy motion, picked up the hat and walked it over to her without being asked. "This yours," he said, his voice low and even the way a river sounds when it runs deep. Cora pushed a strand of dark auburn hair out of her face and took the hat from him. "It was until the wind decided otherwise," she said. He almost smiled, almost. "You just come in on the stage." "I did." "You got people here?" She squared her shoulders. "Not yet." He studied her for a moment with eyes the color of a storm rolling in over the plains, gray and changeable, and then he nodded once as if something had been settled between them that neither of them had spoken aloud. "Thomas Barker," he said. "Cora Brenner." He tipped his hat, stepped back and went on about his business, and Cora watched him walk down the street with the particular ease of a man who had made peace with hard ground beneath his feet. She had not come to Dusty Creek looking for a man. She had come because a woman named Ruth Albright, who ran the town's only schoolhouse, had written to a teaching agency in St. Louis, and Cora had answered the notice. She was 24 years old, trained as a schoolteacher, and she had left behind a life in Missouri that had slowly been dismantling itself piece by piece ever since her father died, and left his debts to the bank instead of the family. She had one trunk, one leather satchel, $42, and the absolute certainty that she was not going back. The town of Dusty Creek was the kind of place that looked rough on the outside and proved rougher on the inside. It sat at the edge of a valley where cattle ranches stretched as far as the eye could reach, and the Pecos River cut through the eastern land like a silver scar. There was a saloon called the Copper Spur, a general store run by a man named Eli Marsh and his wife Hazel, a sheriff's office that was occupied by Sheriff Wade Connolly, a church that doubled as a meeting hall, and the schoolhouse where Cora would be expected to teach the children of ranchers, farmers, and the few tradespeople who had settled in town. Ruth Albright was a stout woman of 50 with steel-gray hair and a handshake that could have pinned a man to the floor. She met Cora at the boarding house run by a widow named Fern Dupree and gave her a tour of the school with the enthusiasm of someone who had been keeping a leaking dam together with her bare hands for several years and had finally been sent a bucket. 23 children, Ruth said, standing in the middle of the single-room schoolhouse with its crooked rows of wooden desks and the smell of chalk dust thick in the air. Ages 6 to 15. Some of them are behind. Some of them fight. One of them bit the last teacher. She paused. That was Charlie Duggan. He is 11 now and has grown out of the biting mostly. Cora looked at the room with its cracked window pane and the map of the United States that had been tacked to the wall with such enthusiasm that it had torn in two along the Mississippi River and then been poorly repaired with a strip of brown paper. She felt something ease inside her chest, something that had been wound tight for a long time. "I can work with this," she said. Ruth looked at her with the particular assessing gaze of a woman who had been disappointed before. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" Older, harder looking. Ruth paused. "You are young, Miss Brenner." "I am not inexperienced," Cora said pleasantly but firmly. Ruth seemed to decide something. "No, I suppose you are not." She handed Cora the key to the schoolhouse. "You start Monday." Cora began learning the rhythms of Dusty Creek the way you learned any new landscape, by paying close attention and keeping quiet until you understood the shape of things. She ate her meals at the boarding house, where Fern Dupree cooked beans and cornbread with the deep seriousness of a woman who understood that people needed to be fed before they could think about anything else. She took her evenings on the porch with a cup of tea and a book, and she walked to the schoolhouse in the mornings through streets that smelled of horses and sawdust, and something baking in the distance. She saw Thomas Barker again on her second day, when she went to Eli Marsh's general store to buy chalk and a ledger book. He was standing at the counter arguing good-naturedly with Eli about the price of fencing wire, his hat in his hands, and he looked up when she came in. He gave her a nod of recognition, the kind you give someone whose name you have kept. "Miss Brenner," he said. "Mr. Barker," she replied. Eli Marsh, who had the nosy warmth of a man who considered himself the social architect of the entire town, immediately inserted himself. "You two know each other. Barker, this is our new school teacher. Miss Brenner, Thomas Barker runs the Double B Ranch about 4 miles east of town. Best cattle operation in the valley, though don't tell Harper that." "Who is Harper?" Cora asked. "My neighbor," Thomas said, putting his hat back on. "Fletcher Harper. He and I do not always agree on where the property line falls." "They have been arguing about that fence for 6 years," Eli said happily. "It is the longest-running entertainment in Dusty Creek." Thomas paid for his wire and touched the brim of his hat at Cora. "Good luck with the school," he said. "You will need some of it with Charlie Duggan." "I have already been warned," Cora said. "About the biting." He did smile then, a real one, brief and startling, like a lamp going on in a dark room, and then he walked out and the bell above the door rang after him. Cora stood there for a moment holding her chalk and her ledger book, and feeling something she had not felt in a long time, which was noticed, in a way that was not unwelcome. She told herself it was just the newness of everything, the way a new place made you alert and sensitive to ordinary things. She turned her attention to the school and kept it there. The children of Dusty Creek were exactly as advertised. They were wild and loud and unpredictable, and several of them tested her in the first week with the focused determination of professionals. Charlie Duggan did not bite her, but he did put a frog in her desk drawer, which she discovered in front of the whole class and managed to receive with such complete calm, picking it up and depositing it outside with a steady hand, that Charlie's expression shifted from triumphant to impressed. By the end of the first week, he was sitting in the front row. She taught reading and arithmetic and geography and a little bit of history, and she told stories about places she had read about and cities she had never seen, and the children leaned toward her the way plants lean toward light, not because she was soft, but because she was honest with them about the size of the world. She was 2 weeks into her position when Thomas Barker came to the school. He came on a Thursday afternoon when the children had already gone home and Cora was erasing the blackboard. She heard boots on the wooden step and turned to find him in the doorway, his hat in his hand, looking slightly uncomfortable in the way that large men sometimes looked in small, tidy rooms. "I wanted to let you know," he said, "that if you need any repairs done to the schoolhouse, you can come to me. I did the roof last fall. Ruth Albright asked me. I noticed that window pane is cracked." Cora looked at him. "That is kind of you," she said. "I have 2 children in your class," he said. "Ben, he is 9, and Lily, she is 7. Cora thought of Ben Barker, who was quick with numbers and had a habit of helping the younger students without being asked, and Lily, who drew horses on every assignment regardless of the subject. "They are good students," she said. Lily drew a very detailed horse across the front of her geography paper, but her handwriting underneath it was excellent. Something shifted in Thomas's face. A softness arrived and then was managed. "Their mother passed 2 years ago," he said. "Fever. I have been doing my best, but some things I cannot give them." Cora set down her eraser. "They are doing well," she said quietly. "You should know that." He nodded. He looked around the room with an expression she could not entirely read, something between pride and grief, as if rooms like this one carried memories he had not yet made peace with. Then he put his hat back on. "I will fix that window Saturday morning, if that is all right with you." "That would be appreciated," she said. He left, and Cora stood in the quiet of the room for a long time after, thinking about the way he had said their mother passed, and about the softness that had moved through his face when she mentioned Lily's horse. Saturday morning he came with tools and a new pane of glass, and she came to let him in because the key was hers. She brought a pot of coffee because it seemed inhospitable not to, and they sat on the front step between the measuring and the cutting and the setting of the glass, and they talked. She told him she was from Springfield, Missouri, and that she had trained at a teaching college there. He told her he had come to Texas from Tennessee 11 years ago when he was 26, with $100 and the understanding that the land here would either kill him or make him. He had bought his first 50 acres from a rancher who was done with the life, and he had built his house himself, and over the years the Double B had grown to more than 600 acres. "You built the house yourself," she said, "not a question." "With help," he said. "A man cannot put up walls alone." "What kind of help?" "Neighbors, mostly. Back then Harper and I were on better terms." A pause. "And there is a man named Augusto Reyes who has worked my ranch for 7 years. He helped with most of the heavy work. He is the best horseman I have ever seen." She asked about the ranch and he described it carefully, the way someone talked about a thing they loved without wanting to sound too proud of loving it, the way the land rolled toward the river, the 3 water tanks he had dug, the 140 head of cattle he was currently running. She listened with genuine interest and asked questions that surprised him. She could tell by the slight pause he took before answering each one. "You know about cattle ranching," he said. "I know about hard work," she said. "My father ran a farm, small but real." "Where is your father now?" "He died 3 years ago," she said, "and the farm went to the bank." He was quiet for a moment, with the kind of quiet that was not empty. "I am sorry," he said. "So am I," she said. "But here I am." He looked at her then with those gray eyes, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name, a recognition, a warmth, the beginning of a thing that wanted to be larger than it currently was. He turned back to the window and finished setting the glass with careful hands, and she refilled his coffee, and by the time he left the morning had turned into afternoon, and neither of them had noticed. He came back the following Saturday for different reasons, less obvious ones, and she was there for different reasons equally less obvious, and they talked again on the step while the town went about its business around them, and the sun moved across the sky without asking permission from anyone. It became a pattern without either of them formally agreeing to it, the way some patterns establish themselves not through decision, but through the quiet gravity of 2 people who wanted to be in the same place. He came to her Thursday afternoons when school let out, sometimes with an actual errand, a question about Ben's arithmetic, a request about the spelling primer, and sometimes with nothing more than the look of a man who had thought of a thing he wanted to say to someone in particular. She looked forward to Thursdays with a feeling she recognized as happiness, simple and direct, not complicated by anything but itself. The town noticed, as towns do. Fern Dupree mentioned at supper one evening that Thomas Barker had not looked at a woman twice since his wife Eleanor passed. She said this to the table in general, but her eyes landed on Cora in a way that was not accidental. Hazel Marsh, Eli's wife, stopped Cora outside the store one morning and asked if she would be attending the church social at the end of the month, and then mentioned that Thomas Barker generally helped with the supper table and did not usually stay for the dancing, but that he had very nearly stayed last year. Ruth Albright said nothing, but looked knowing every time Thomas's name came up in conversation. Cora allowed herself to feel what she felt without pushing it into words too quickly. She was not a woman who rushed herself. She had grown up watching her mother love her father with the patient endurance of someone tending a fire in a long winter, and she understood that love was not a thing that arrived all at once, but built itself carefully from the materials of ordinary time spent close to another person. She knew she was falling in love with him the evening he came to the school, not at the usual hour but at dusk, when she was locking up, and she could see from 20 yards away that something had happened. He was carrying himself differently, tighter, and there was a tension in his jaw. "What is wrong?" she said immediately. He stopped. He looked at her as if he had not expected her to see it so quickly. "Fletcher Harper is claiming a piece of my eastern pasture," he said. He has filed a land claim at the county office. He says the original survey was wrong and that the boundary runs 200 yards west of where I have always understood it to be. Is he right? No, Thomas said flatly. I have the original deed. But the county assessor is coming out next week to look at both claims, and in the meantime Harper has moved his cattle onto the disputed strip, and if I move them off it looks like I am the aggressor, and if I leave them there it looks like I am accepting his claim. Cora thought about it. Do you have your deed with you? Back at the ranch? Bring it to me tomorrow, she said. I am good with documents. I want to see what the original language says about the boundary markers. He stared at her. You want to read my land deed? I want to help you keep your land, she said simply. He came back the next morning with the deed, a formal document on heavy paper that had been signed in 1871, and Cora sat at her desk with it, while the morning light came through the newly repaired window and Thomas sat in one of the student chairs, which he occupied with the contained discomfort of a man not designed for small furniture. She read carefully. The deed described the eastern boundary as running from a granite outcropping marked with 3 carved notches to a second granite formation near the river bend. It used specific language about natural formations that were permanent. The markers in this deed are geological, she said. Granite outcroppings. They cannot be moved and they cannot be argued away. Whatever the original survey lines show on paper, the physical boundary markers in this deed take precedence. Harper's claim is based on the survey lines, Thomas said. Then you need a surveyor to go out and identify the granite formations described in your deed, Cora said, before the county assessor comes. If those formations are identified and documented, they establish your boundary regardless of what the paper survey shows. He was looking at her with an expression that had begun as something like respectful surprise and was shifting into something warmer. Where did you learn to read documents like that? My father's debts, she said, without elaboration but without bitterness. I spent 2 years reading contracts and notes and deeds trying to find a way to keep the farm. I did not find one for him, but I learned how they work. He was quiet for a moment. I am sorry about the farm, he said. I know, she said. Take that deed to the surveyor in Canyon Creek. Ask him to come out and physically locate those formations. Do it this week. He did. And 3 weeks later, when the county assessor came and stood in Thomas's eastern pasture with both deeds in his hand and a surveyor's report showing the locations of 2 granite outcroppings that matched the 1871 deed exactly, Fletcher Harper's claim was dismissed. The strip of land remained Thomas's. Harper was furious and went home and apparently said several things about Thomas that were unflattering, but none of it mattered because the land was settled. Thomas came to Cora the evening after the assessor's ruling with a bunch of wildflowers that she strongly suspected he had picked himself from the side of the road on the way into town. They were slightly wilted and arranged with no particular skill, and they were the most sincere flowers she had ever received. I wanted to thank you, he said. You do not need to thank me, she said. I know I do not need to, he said. I want to. She took the flowers and put them in the tin cup on her windowsill, and she turned back to find him closer than she expected, standing in the doorway of the boarding house parlor with the last of the day's light behind him, and something in his expression had changed, had opened a little, become less managed. Cora, he said, and the sound of her first name in his mouth was a small, significant thing. Thomas, she said in the same key. He cleared his throat. He was not a man who found words easily. She had learned that about him. He was a man who expressed things through action, through showing up, through fixing windows and bringing deeds and finding granite formations. But he was trying now to use words, and she appreciated the effort. I have not been interested in a person, he said carefully, the way I find myself interested in you. Not in a long time. I want to be honest about that. Her heart was doing something that would have embarrassed her if he could hear it. I am glad you were honest, she said. I am not sure what I am asking, he said. I have 2 children and a ranch that takes most of what I have got. I am not a simple proposition. I did not come to Texas looking for simple, she said. He almost smiled again, that brief illumination. Would you come to supper at the ranch, he said. Sunday evening. Ben and Lily will be there. I want you to know where I live. Yes, she said. I would like that very much. Sunday evening she rode out to the Double B on a horse borrowed from Fern Dupree's small stable, a calm bay mare that seemed to know the road east of town without being directed. The ranch came into view gradually, the way something earned reveals itself, first the fence line, then the outbuildings, then the main house, which was larger than she had imagined, not grand but solid, built with the kind of care that said the man who built it intended to stay. Thomas met her at the gate on horseback and rode in alongside her, and there was something so natural about riding together in the late afternoon light that she almost said something about it and then did not, choosing instead to hold it quietly. The house was clean in the way a man kept a house clean when he was doing it himself, thoroughly but without fussiness, and there were children's drawings tacked to the wall near the kitchen, and a saddle laid across a wooden horse near the door, and boots of 3 different sizes lined up on the porch, which struck her somewhere deep and soft. Ben came out first, a solemn dark-haired boy with his father's eyes, and shook her hand with the grave formality of a 9-year-old who had been told this was appropriate behavior. Lily came out behind him and stared at Cora with an expression of complex assessment for a full 15 seconds before saying, "You are prettier than I thought a teacher would be." "Lily," Thomas said. "It is a compliment," Lily said, reasonably. Cora crouched down to Lily's level. "And you are exactly as interesting as I thought you would be," she said. "I have been looking at your horses." Lily's eyes went wide. "The ones I draw, every single one," Cora said. "The one on your geography paper was particularly good. What is its name?" "Scout," Lily said immediately. "I always name them Scout." The supper was beans and roasted beef and cornbread, and Augusto Reyes joined them, a quiet, compact man from Chihuahua with a wide smile and hands that had clearly shaped more horses than most men saw in a lifetime. He was polite to Cora with the particular warmth of someone who was happy for Thomas in a way that had nothing to do with himself. After supper, Ben showed her the book he was reading, which was about the explorers Lewis and Clark, and asked her 17 questions about the Missouri River that she answered with growing pleasure, because he was genuinely curious and not performing it. Lily showed her Scout, the actual horse, a gray pony with kind eyes that lived in the small paddock behind the barn, and told her a detailed history of the horse that included the day Scout had eaten half a hat belonging to a traveling preacher, and the preacher had not been amused but everyone else had. When the children went inside, Thomas and Cora sat on the porch in the cooling evening and listened to the land settling into dark, the cattle moving somewhere out in the fields, a night bird calling once and then going quiet. "They like you," he said. "I like them," she said. "Ben is hungry for knowledge. He reminds me of the kind of student who will go a long way if someone keeps feeding him books." "I cannot always give him what he needs," Thomas said. "I know enough to run a ranch." "I am not educated. You are intelligent," she said. "Not the same thing. Sometimes it is more useful," she said. She looked at the dark shape of the valley spreading out beyond the fence line, the star-crowded sky above it. "This land is extraordinary," she said. "I grew up with green and trees and soft ground. This is different. It is harder and louder and bigger." "Does it scare you?" She thought about it honestly. "It did the first day. Now it feels like something I want to understand." He was quiet beside her for a long moment. The porch was narrow enough that their shoulders were close without touching, a proximity that she was fully aware of without moving away from. "Eleanor loved this land," he said. "She came from San Antonio. She was not afraid of anything." A pause. "I miss her. But I think I have been afraid that missing her means I cannot reach for anything else." "Grief does not close everything," Cora said softly. "No," he agreed. "I am learning that." She rode home that night under a sky so thick with stars it seemed to lean down toward the earth, and she felt something she had not felt since before her father died, which was that the future looked like a place she wanted to go. Through the next month, they moved toward each other with the unhurried care of two people who understood what was at stake and were not interested in rushing past the good parts. He came to town more often than his ranch required. She found reasons to ride east. They talked the way people talked when they were learning each other, with deep attention to what was said and what was not, with the occasional silence that was itself a form of conversation. He took her riding one morning in the early spring when the valley was covered in wildflowers. Blankets of pink and yellow and purple spread across the red earth like something the land had been saving for a special occasion. And they rode along the ridge above the Pecos River while the water caught the sun below them. And she thought that she had never in her life seen anything so fiercely beautiful. He pulled up beside her at the top of the ridge and they sat their horses and looked out over it together, and he said, "I come up here when things are difficult. I have never brought anyone else up here." She understood what he was giving her. "Thank you," she said. They were on their way back down when his horse, a large chestnut named Captain, shied suddenly at something in the brush, a rabbit or a snake, and lurched sideways. And in the scramble of hooves on loose shale, Thomas's hand shot out and grabbed her mare's bridle, steadying both animals with the practiced instinct of a man who had spent most of his life in proximity to horses. His arm came close enough that his sleeve brushed her hand, and when the horses settled, he looked at her with an expression that had nothing to do with horses. He let go of the bridle slowly. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady. He leaned across the small distance between their horses and kissed her, just once, unhurriedly, with the same quality of attention he brought to everything. And she kissed him back with a warmth that had been building for weeks and was relieved to have somewhere to go. When he pulled back, he was looking at her with those gray eyes fully open, nothing managed or contained in them. "I've been wanting to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I have been wondering when you would." He smiled properly then, a full smile that changed the whole geography of his face, and she thought that she would like very much to be the reason for that smile for a very long time. They rode back down to the valley in the early afternoon light, and neither of them said much, but the quiet between them had changed character entirely, had become the kind of quiet that was warm and certain rather than careful and measuring. The spring moved into summer and Dusty Creek baked under the Texas sun, and the children in Cora's school grew restless in the heat, and she took their lessons outside under the cottonwood trees when the heat in the schoolroom became unreasonable, and she kept them engaged by making geography into a game and arithmetic into a competition and history into a story, which it always was if you told it properly. She and Thomas were understood by the town as a couple without ever having made an announcement about it, because small towns needed no announcements. They needed only to observe, and Dusty Creek had been observing them since the first Saturday with the window glass. Fern Dupree told Cora with great satisfaction that she had known from the moment Cora stepped off the stagecoach that something significant was going to happen to Thomas Barker. "You could not have known that," Cora said. "You had not even met me." "I knew it was going to happen to him," Fern said unperturbed. "I did not know it would be you specifically, but when you showed up it was clear." "That is not how knowing things works," Cora said. "It absolutely is," Fern said. Thomas came to supper at the boarding house, and Cora came to the ranch, and Ben showed her his Lewis and Clark book with its pages falling out from being read too many times, and she ordered him a new copy through the general store from a supplier in Austin, which arrived 6 weeks later, and which Ben received with an expression of pure delight that undid her completely. Lily continued to draw horses on everything, and began asking Cora if she could come to the school in the evenings to draw on the big blackboard, which Cora allowed on Fridays, and which became a weekly ritual where Lily drew enormous horses in chalk, and Cora drew landscapes around them, and they talked about everything and nothing while the evening light changed in the cracked pane window. One such Friday evening Thomas came to collect Lily, and stood in the doorway watching the two of them at the blackboard. Lily on a step stool reaching for the highest part of her horse's head, Cora adding a range of mountains behind it. And his expression was something Cora saw only because she turned at just the right moment before he had a chance to compose it. Something raw and grateful and certain, like a man who had found the thing he had not dared to name. She held that look in her memory like a coin she had been given, taking it out sometimes and examining it. The summer also brought trouble of a different kind from Fletcher Harper, who had not accepted the land ruling gracefully, and who had begun doing small things that fell just short of actionable, cutting a section of Thomas's fence line and claiming it was accidental, letting his cattle drift onto Thomas's range when Augusto was alone on the eastern pasture. Thomas absorbed these indignities with a controlled patience that Cora admired and also occasionally worried about. "You need to say something to Sheriff Connolly," she told him on a hot July evening when they were sitting on the ranch porch after the children were in bed. "Connolly is a good man, but he does not want to get between two ranchers over fence lines," Thomas said. "He is the law," Cora said. "The law is a lot of things out here," Thomas said, and there was a tiredness in his voice that was old, not new. "I have dealt with Harper before. He pushes until he finds a wall and then he stops. He has not found a wall yet on this." "Then show him where the wall is," Cora said. "Cora, I mean through legal means," she said patiently. "Document every incident, date, time, what happened, witnesses. If Augusto sees it, he is a witness. If there is a pattern, Connolly cannot ignore it and neither can a judge." He looked at her. "You think about things the way a lawyer thinks about them. I think about things the way a person thinks about them when they have seen what happens when you do not document," she said. "Keep a record, Thomas." He started keeping a record. By the end of August, he had 17 entries, and when he walked into Connolly's office with the document, neatly written in Cora's hand because Thomas had admitted with some embarrassment that his writing was hard to read, the sheriff studied it for a long time and then leaned back in his chair. "This is thorough," Connolly said. "Miss Brenner helped me organize it," Thomas said. Connolly looked at him with an expression that was almost amused. "I will have a conversation with Harper," he said. "A formal one." The incident stopped after that. Harper did not become neighborly, but he stopped the smaller provocations, and the fence line held, and the cattle stayed where they belonged. Thomas came to Cora the evening he heard from Augusto that Harper's men had moved back to their own range and stayed there, and he brought her a piece of apple pie from the Copper Spur, because it was Friday, and the Copper Spur made pie on Fridays, and he had learned that she was particularly fond of apple. They sat on the boarding house porch in the last of the summer warmth and ate pie and listened to the town settling into its evening sounds, the piano starting up in the saloon 2 streets over, someone's horse moving in a stable, the distant call of someone calling someone home for supper. "You have changed things for me," he said. She waited because she could tell he was working toward something. "I have been alone for 2 years," he said. "Not just without a leaner, though that. But alone in the way that a person is alone when they are carrying everything themselves. The children, the ranch, the land trouble, all of it. I am used to it. I am not complaining about it." He paused. "But having someone who thinks with me, who sees the problems the same way and helps me think through them. I did not know how much I had missed that." "I did not know either," she said, "until I had it." He set his plate down. He turned to look at her in the lamplight from the parlor window. "I want to ask you something," he said. Her heart was very quiet, the way it got sometimes when something important was about to happen. "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. "I want you to know that it is not a simple ask. You would be coming into my life, which has children in it and land trouble in it and hard work in it. You are a teacher and you are good at it, and I am not asking you to give that up. I am asking you if you want all of it, the ranch and the children and me." She was quiet for a moment that she understood might feel long to him, but that she needed, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to feel the full weight of the thing before she said yes. "Thomas," she said, "I came to Texas to start over. I came here with almost nothing and I built something from the ground up, and I am proud of it. But the best thing that has happened to me since I got here, the best and most surprising thing is you. The whole of you, Ben and Lily and Captain and Augusto and the double B and the granite outcroppings and all of it. Yes, I will marry you." He took her hand. He held it with the same care he gave to everything, and he said, "Thank you, Cora." "Do not thank me," she said. "I am getting the better end of this." "You are not," he said. "We will argue about it later," she said. He laughed, a real laugh, full and surprised, and she thought that if she could keep causing that sound, she would consider herself lucky for the rest of her life. They told the children the next morning. Ben received the news with the same grave consideration he brought to most things, and then asked 3 practical questions about whether Cora would keep teaching, and whether she would change her name, and whether she would bring her books. And when all 3 questions were answered satisfactorily, he nodded and said he thought it was a good decision. Lily screamed with a joy so large it startled Captain in his paddock, and then ran to Cora and wrapped herself around her with both arms and said, "I told Ben you were going to be our mama. I told him." "When did you tell him that?" Cora asked, slightly undone. "The first Friday we drew on the blackboard," Lily said without any self-consciousness. "I told him that Papa looked at you like he looked at Scout, which is different from how he looks at everything else." Cora looked at Thomas over Lily's head, and he had the expression of a man both slightly embarrassed and entirely without regret. "The horse comparison is the highest compliment I know how to give," Lily said seriously. Augusto Reyes, when he was told, shook Thomas's hand and then shook Cora's hand with both of his, and said something in Spanish that Thomas translated as, roughly, that it was about time. And then Augusto went back to work with the satisfied air of a man who had been waiting for this particular thing to happen, and was glad to see it through. They were married in October, when the heat had finally broken, and the valley was golden in the way that Texas did autumn, reluctantly and magnificently. The ceremony was in the church, performed by the pastor, a thin, energetic man named Reverend Cole, who seemed genuinely delighted to marry anyone who presented themselves at his door. The whole town came, which Cora had not expected and which overwhelmed her in a way she was not prepared for, the warmth of it, the sense that she had become part of something she had not known she was building. Ruth Albright sat in the front row and cried in a dignified way that she would later deny, and Fern Dupree wore a hat with 3 feathers in it and looked triumphant. Eli and Hazel Marsh brought a wedding cake, which Hazel had baked and which was lopsided but magnificent. Even Sheriff Connolly came and cleaned up reasonably well. Charlie Duggan, who had not bitten anyone in well over a year, drew a picture of the wedding on the back of a school exercise paper and presented it to Cora the following Monday with the solemnity of a great artist giving a patron his finest work. She put it in the schoolhouse window. Cora moved into the ranch house on the Double B and brought her trunk and her leather satchel and her books, which filled 2 shelves that Thomas had built specifically for them in the sitting room, and she looked at the books on the shelves against the warm wood of the ranch house wall and felt the particular satisfaction of a life settling into a shape that fit. She kept teaching. Thomas had not asked her to stop, and she had not offered. And on the mornings when she rode into town on the bay mare, the children would be waiting on the school steps, and she would think about all the things she was going to show them that day, and the thinking made her feel full of purpose and glad. The winter came hard that year, one of the hardest in recent memory, a blue norther sweeping down from the panhandle in November that dropped the temperature 40 degrees in an afternoon and frosted the grass white and made the cattle restless. Thomas and Augusto worked long days keeping the herd together and maintaining the water sources, and Cora managed the house and the children and cooked enormous amounts of food because both men came in from the cold in the evenings hollow with hunger and needing warmth from the inside out. She was not resentful of the work. She had not come to the ranch expecting it to be comfortable. She found in herself a competence she had not fully used before, a knowledge of how to run a household under pressure, how to stretch resources and manage cold, and keep people well when the elements were against them. The children helped without being asked, Ben carrying wood and Lily keeping the fire in the parlor going, and Cora looked at them in those long winter evenings and felt the particular love of someone who had not expected to become a parent and found that it suited her. The winter also gave them long evenings together after the children were in bed, Thomas and Cora at the kitchen table with the lamp between them, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes playing cards, and these evenings became the architecture of their marriage in a way that grand gestures never could have. They argued sometimes because they were both strong-minded people with opinions about things, and the arguments were real but not unkind, and they resolved them the same way, by paying attention to what the other person was actually saying underneath what they were saying. One evening in late January, when the cold had settled in for a long stay and the fire was burning and the children were asleep, and the ranch was wrapped in that particular silence that only deep winter produced, Cora told Thomas she thought she might be pregnant. He went very still in the way that people went still when they were absorbing something large. Then he said, "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand and held it for a long time and did not say anything, which was the right response, and she loved him for knowing it. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Nervous," she said honestly. "Happy, nervous. Both of those make sense," he said. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Very." A pause. "Are you afraid?" She thought about it. "A little," she said. "I am not afraid of having a child. I am a little afraid of the rest of it, of raising another person, of doing it well." "You are already doing it well," he said. "With Ben and Lily you have been since almost the beginning." "That is different," she said. "It is different," he agreed. "But the instinct is the same. I have watched you with them." He squeezed her hand. "We will do it the same way we have done everything else. Together, and one thing at a time." She leaned her forehead against his briefly, a gesture she had discovered she loved for its quiet intimacy, and he kept holding her hand across the table, and outside the cold pressed against the windows, and the fire held it off, and she felt that the life she had built was solid and warm and entirely, thoroughly hers. The pregnancy became known to the town in the way that pregnancies became known in small towns, without anyone specifically being told. Ruth Albright arrived at the school in February with a pot of herb tea that was good for what she called the morning difficulties, which was as close as Ruth came to delicacy. Hazel Marsh sent over a baby blanket she had knitted, preemptively, in yellow, because she said she never assumed. Lily was transported by the news. She told everyone she met that she was going to have a brother or sister, and offered detailed opinions on the matter at every opportunity. Ben asked whether the new baby would affect the distribution of dessert at supper, and when assured it would not, he seemed satisfied. Spring came back around and the valley bloomed again, and the norther was a memory, and the cattle were fat on the new grass, and Thomas rode the fence lines in the mornings with Augusto, and came home in the evenings smelling of horse and sun and the red earth. And Cora met him on the porch each evening with the ease of a woman who knew what she was coming out to meet. She taught through the spring as her pregnancy became more visible, and the children in her class watched it with frank curiosity that she answered honestly when asked, because she believed in honesty with children and had no patience for the idea that they should be kept ignorant of natural things. Charlie Duggan asked who was going to teach when she had the baby, and she said Mrs. Albright would take over for a few months, and Charlie thought about this and said he supposed that was all right. She stopped teaching in June when the baby was close, because the summer heat was fierce and she could not in good conscience stand in a schoolhouse in a Texas summer in her condition and expect anything useful to happen. She spent her afternoons on the porch with her reading and her letters, writing back to a few old friends from Springfield, and occasionally to the teaching agency that had sent her to Dusty Creek, to tell them that the placement had worked out very well. The baby was born in July on a morning when the valley was loud with cicadas, and the sky was that particular deep blue that only happened in the highest heat of the Texas summer. Thomas sat with her through the whole of it, which was not customary but which he refused to modify, and Fern Dupree, who had experience with births, served as midwife with competent hands and calm authority. The baby was a boy. Thomas was holding Cora's hand when he arrived, and the sound the man made when he heard the baby cry was one of those sounds she stored away in the deep, permanent part of her memory, something between relief and wonder, and a gratitude so large it had no clear container. They named him James, after Cora's father. James was a loud, determined baby who from the first week made it clear that he had strong opinions about timing and volume and the scheduling of his own needs. Ben, presented with his brother, looked at him for a long moment and then said carefully that he was smaller than expected. Lily said he was the best thing that had ever happened to the ranch, which was high praise from a girl who also said that about Scout the horse on a regular basis. Augusto came into the house to see the baby, holding his hat in front of him, and looked at James with an expression of the deepest tenderness, and said that he had a good face, and then went back outside and came back an hour later with a small carved wooden horse that he had made that afternoon, working fast, with his knife, its legs not entirely even but its spirit very much present, and he placed it on the shelf above the cradle. Cora recovered quickly, as she had suspected she would, because she was not a woman built for extended recovery. By September she was back at the schoolhouse, James installed in a basket behind her desk where he could be tended to between lessons, and the children of Dusty Creek accepted this arrangement with the adaptability of children who had not yet been taught that such things were unusual. The years moved the way years moved when they were full, not quickly or slowly, but with the density of things fully lived. James grew into a noisy, affectionate, opinionated boy who adored his father and followed Augusto around the ranch like a dedicated apprentice. Ben grew into a serious young man who read everything he could get his hands on, and who, by the time he was 15, had ambitions about going to study in Austin that Thomas and Cora supported with everything they had. Lily drew horses on every surface that allowed it, and showed a talent for training them that had Augusto shaking his head in admiring disbelief, and a gift for managing difficult animals that was going to serve her exceedingly well. The Double B expanded in those years, slowly and deliberately, because Thomas was not a man who overreached. He added 50 acres to the south when the previous owner moved to California, and a second water tank, and a small bunkhouse when he hired a second hand to help Augusto. The schoolhouse got a new roof, which Thomas organized himself, and a second window so the room was properly lit, and Cora taught through all of it, 12 years in the same room, watching children arrive unable to read and leave with enough knowledge to navigate a world that was changing fast around them. The Wild West was changing. The railroad came through 60 miles north in 1883 and changed the cattle drives, made some things easier and some things different in ways that were not entirely welcome to everyone. The open range was slowly closing as more homesteaders arrived, and more fence lines went up, and there were real tensions between the big ranchers who had counted on open grazing and the new settlers who had a legal right to their claims. Thomas navigated this carefully, because he was a man who had built his life on the law even when the law was inconvenient, and he fenced his own range properly, and accepted the new reality even when men he respected were furious about it. Fletcher Harper, notably, did not accept it gracefully, and the trouble between Harper's ranch and the newer homesteads to his north became a real problem that Sheriff Connolly eventually had to involve the county judge in. Thomas stayed out of it, but when two young homesteader families were being actively harassed off their land in the winter of 1884, Thomas did something that surprised even Cora. He went to speak with them. He came home one evening and told her he had visited the Vasquez family and the Lindqvist family, both of whom had legal claims on land northeast of Harper's Range, and that both families were frightened and considering leaving. "I told them about my own land trouble with Harper 6 years ago," he said. "I told them to document everything. I told them their claims were legal and that the law would back them if they pursued it properly." "You told them about the documentation," Cora said. He looked at her. "You told me about the documentation," he said. "I was just passing it along." She felt a warmth in her chest that never entirely went away in the years they were together. "Did it help?" "I think so," he said. Maria Vasquez looked less like she was going to pack up and leave by the time I walked out. The Vasquez and Lindqvist families stayed. They kept records. When Harper's men cut a fence on the Vasquez property the following spring, and it was documented and reported, Connolly took it seriously enough to bring the county judge in, and Harper was finally assessed a formal penalty that he paid with the furious silence of a man who understood he had lost in a permanent way. The injustice of what Harper had done to those families, the deliberate harassment of people who had every legal right to their land, people who had come to Texas in good faith and been targeted because they were new, and because Harper thought he could push them away, sat badly with Cora and with Thomas both. It was not a simple or comfortable truth that the law protected people only when they knew how to use it and had the resources to do so, and that plenty of people did not have either. Thomas began making a habit of introducing himself to new settlers in the valley and having frank conversations with them about their rights and the county processes, not as a lawyer or an official, just as a man who had learned things the hard way and thought it useful to pass them on. Cora did the same with the women and the children. When Maria Vasquez's daughter Alina started coming to the schoolhouse, Cora made a point of giving her the same fierce investment she gave every other student. And when Alina turned out to be extraordinarily quick with reading and had a particular gift for composition, Cora told her parents with the directness she always brought to such conversations that their daughter was exceptional, and they should make sure she had every opportunity to go as far as her abilities could take her. Life on the Double B deepened in the way of things that were solidly built. A second daughter arrived 3 years after James, and they named her Clara, and she was a quiet, watchful child who turned out to have a sharp wit that surprised everyone who expected her to be unobtrusive. James at 7 was already helping Augusto with the horses in the mornings, up before sunrise with a seriousness about the work that made Thomas quietly proud in the way of a father who sees something of himself that he hoped to pass on. Lily at 16 was managing the training of a difficult mare that had thrown 2 grown men, and had proceeded with a patience and confidence that had Augusto telling everyone in town she was the best natural horsewoman he had seen. Ben had left for Austin to study at 17, on a scholarship arranged through a combination of his academic performance and a letter Cora had written to an educational foundation that had been supporting promising students in Texas since before the war. He wrote letters home every 2 weeks without fail, long letters full of ideas and questions and descriptions of the city that he knew his family wanted to read. On a particular evening in September, when the valley was in that golden autumn mode and the air had the first cool edge of coming winter, Thomas and Cora sat on the porch of the Double B as they had done hundreds and hundreds of times, in the same chairs that had been on that porch since before Cora came to it, and the children were in various states of their own evenings, James building something in the barn, Clara reading inside, and Lily down at the paddock with the difficult mare. The land spread out in front of them in the diminishing light, the fence lines catching the last sun, the cattle moving slowly in the lower pasture, the cottonwood trees along the creek thick with that particular end-of-summer heaviness. The sky was turning colors that no painter had ever entirely gotten right. Thomas had Cora's hand in his, which was where it tended to be in the evenings, held with the same care he had always given it, and she was leaning slightly against his shoulder in the way she had learned to lean against things that were solid without thinking about it. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "I asked if that hat was yours," he said. "Yes." You said it was until the wind decided otherwise. And you almost smiled, she said. I did not want to make a bad impression. You did not, she said, not even slightly. She was quiet for a moment. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had stepped off that stage and someone else had picked up the hat? No, he said immediately. She looked at him. I do not think about other versions of things, he said. There is only this one, and it is the one I want. A pause. I knew something when I walked that hat over to you. I did not know what it was yet, but something. She squeezed his hand. So did I, she said. I thought it was just the newness of the place making me notice everything more strongly. Was it not? Partly, she said, but partly you. He turned his head and looked at her, and she looked back, and after 12 years she still felt that particular ease and warmth in his gaze, the way he looked at her like a man who had arrived somewhere he intended to stay. Are you happy? He asked. The same question he had asked her the night she told him about James. Yes, she said. The same answer, and as true now as it had been then, and truer. Are you? More than I deserve, he said. You deserve all of it, she said firmly. He smiled at that, the full smile, the one she had been a collector of since the first time she saw it. Down at the paddock, Lily's voice carried up on the evening air, talking to the mare, low and even and steady, the way she talked horses into trusting her. In the barn, James was making the specific banging sounds of a child using tools with more enthusiasm than technique. Inside the house, Clara would be reading in her particular intent way, entirely removed from the world around her in the best possible sense. And somewhere in Austin, Ben would be sitting in a room surrounded by books, writing his weekly letter, asking questions about a world he was determined to understand. The night bird called once in the direction of the creek and went quiet. Cora thought about the woman she had been 6 years before she came to Dusty Creek, before her father died and the farm went, and the tight, careful future she had planned had unraveled. And she thought about the woman she had been on that first day, standing in the dirt road with the wind in her face and her hat being blown down the street. And she thought about all the choices and all the days in between. The schoolhouse and the children and the window glass and the deed and the wildflowers and the granite outcroppings and the morning on the ridge above the river and the first kiss and the wedding in October and the names of 5 horses and 12 years of evenings exactly like this one. She thought about how a life was made, not from a plan but from an accumulation of ordinary days given to things worth giving them to, and from the luck, if you could call it luck, of finding the person you wanted to spend those ordinary days with. Thomas shifted slightly in his chair, and his arm came around her shoulders with the casual completeness of long habit, and she settled into it, and the valley went on spreading out before them in the last of the light. Fern Dupree's bay mare had died the previous spring, and Cora now rode a horse of her own, a rust-colored mare named October because of the month she had arrived. And October was stabled in Thomas's barn and spent her days in the paddock with Scout, who was 13 now and somewhat senior in attitude. The 2 horses had made their peace with each other in the way that animals did when they shared a space long enough and had no particular reason to be difficult. She thought about October and Scout standing together in the paddock, and about the small carved wooden horse on the shelf above James's bed, which had been moved there from the infant cradle and had occupied that shelf ever since. She thought about Charlie Duggan, who was 23 now and running his father's farm and who had stopped in at the schoolhouse the previous spring with his wife and their new baby to show her what he had grown into. She thought about Ruth Albright, who had retired 2 years ago and was living with her daughter's family in San Antonio, and who wrote twice a year with the precise, slightly critical fondness she had always shown. She thought about Springfield, Missouri, and her father's farm, and how small and far away it seemed from here, from this porch, from this life. I am going to write to Ben tomorrow, she said. I want to ask him if he has decided about coming home for Christmas. He will come home, Thomas said. He always comes home. I know, she said. I like asking anyway. Because you like his letters, Thomas said. I like everything about him, Cora said. He writes the way he thinks. You can see him in the sentences. He thinks like you, Thomas said. He always has. She looked up at him. He thinks like both of us, she said. He has your sense of things. What sense of things? The sense that some things are worth working hard for and some things are not worth fighting over, and the important thing is knowing which is which, she said. He considered this. That is a generous description, he said. It is an accurate one. Clara appeared in the doorway behind them, small and precise in her nightgown, 7 years old and disinclined to go to sleep without informing someone that she was doing so. "I am going to bed," she announced. "Good night, Clara," they said simultaneously, which was something that still happened occasionally after 12 years and still made her smile. "Good night," Clara said, with the gravity of a person conveying important information, and disappeared. A moment later Lily came up from the paddock, her boots leaving dust on the porch steps, her dark hair loose and tangled from the wind, and reported that the mare had taken a piece of apple from her hand for the first time, and that this was significant progress, and she was very pleased. She went inside with the contained energy of someone who had accomplished a thing and was planning the next steps. James emerged from the barn shortly after, covered in sawdust, and announced that he was building a box and that it was going to be very good when it was finished, and that he needed more nails. He was told that the nails would be available tomorrow and that tonight he needed to wash his hands and have supper and go to bed, and he accepted this routing without great protest, which was progress. The porch was theirs again in the full dark. "We have good children," Thomas said. "We do," Cora said. "We did well with them." "You did well with them," he said. "I provided the framework." "You provided considerably more than the framework," she said. "You were there every morning and every evening, and you worked to keep this land so they would have something solid under them. That is not just framework. You made them readers," he said. "You made them curious about the world." "Ben was always curious about the world," she said. "He was born that way." "Lily got it from you," he said. "She was not always that way. She got more interested in things outside the horses after you came." Cora was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of that in the best way. "I came here with nothing," she said softly. "I want you to know that I understand that. I came here with a satchel and some chalk and the idea that I could make something from scratch, and I did, but not the way I thought I would. I thought I would build it by myself. I did not understand that the better version of building something was building it with someone." "Neither did I," he said. "After a leaner, I thought the building was done. I thought I had the thing I was going to have and lost it, and that was the shape of my life going forward." "And then your hat caught the wind," she said. "My hat caught the wind," he confirmed, "and I thought it would be rude not to return it." She laughed, and he laughed with her in the warm dark, and the sound of it went out into the valley where the night was settling in with all its familiar weight, and the stars were beginning their patient accumulation above the land. The Double B sat solid and real in the dark around them, all 650 acres of it, the water tanks and the fence lines and the bunkhouse and the barn, and the paddock where October and Scout stood in the quiet, and the house with its 2 bookshelves, and the carved wooden horse on James's shelf, and the chalk drawings that were always partially visible on the schoolhouse blackboard in town. All of it built from the ground up, piece by careful piece, the same way everything worth having was built. Cora rested her head fully on Thomas's shoulder and felt his arm around her and watched the stars come out over the Texas Valley. She thought of the letter she would write to Ben in the morning, and the lesson she was planning on Rivers for Thursday, and the apple she should remember to give Lily for the mare, and the nails James needed, and the pie Hazel Marsh had promised to bring on Sunday, and all the small, real, necessary, wonderful things that made up a life that was entirely, completely hers. Thomas pressed a kiss to the top of her head with the unhurried ease of a man who had been doing that for 12 years and intended to keep doing it for the rest of his. "Come inside," he said. "It is getting cold." "In a minute," she said. She stayed 1 more minute in the dark with the valley spread below her, and the stars above and the warmth of the man beside her, and then she went inside. The fire was banked in the kitchen, and the lamp was lit on the table, and the house was full of the specific quiet of children well settled and horses watered and land properly tended and work honestly done. And Cora Brenner Barker looked at all of it and knew, with the total, settled certainty of a woman who had earned her happiness and recognized it when it arrived, that she was exactly, precisely, irrevocably where she was supposed to be.